In 1973, the film The Sting sparked a massive revival of 1900s ragtime music simply by dropping a needle on 70-year-old piano compositions. The movie soundtrack, specifically the standard MCA 390 pressing, became a massive global bestseller. Millions of copies were pressed and distributed worldwide. Yet today, if you take one of those original 50-year-old analog pressings and play it alongside a modern digital stream, a paradox emerges. The wax record delivers a pronounced acoustic depth that the streaming audio fails to replicate. It is tempting to dismiss this audiophile preference as psychological nostalgia or a bias for a vintage aesthetic. We often assume newer technology naturally produces a cleaner, more accurate sound. But the superior sound of the analog pressing is dictated entirely by mechanical physics. The record's physical constraints act as literal preservers of dynamic range. An analog vinyl record functions as a physical, three-dimensional mechanical environment. Modern digital delivery relies on an algorithmic interpretation, converting binary code back into sound waves. Vinyl skips the code and physically houses the wave itself. The quality of that playback is governed by two mechanical factors: the microscopic geometry of the groove and the disc's macroscopic rotational mass. To understand why the Sting sounds better on wax, we have to deconstruct the musical architecture of the composition and the physical architecture of the record itself. The foundation of the soundtrack rests on Scott Joplin's original ragtime compositions, written at the turn of the 20th century. For the 1973 film, composer Marvin Hamlisch adapted these solo piano pieces, expanding their syncopated rhythms into massive, polished orchestral swells. Hamlisch's major key orchestrations are bright and energetic, but they hide a deep, underlying melancholia. Perceiving that emotional depth requires precise timbral separation, allowing the listener to hear the distinct voice of every instrument. This requires extreme dynamic range, defined here as the acoustic space necessary to simultaneously render a lean, direction-leading bass line and delicate, shifting string sections without muddying the frequencies. Reproducing this highly dynamic, layered orchestration demands a playback medium capable of extreme frequency isolation. That establishes the baseline requirement for the physical record. We can trace that conceptual acoustic space directly into the literal, physical space of a record groove. This 3D cross-section demonstrates how dynamic range is physically encoded into vinyl. To house larger bass amplitudes, the grooves must be cut wider and deeper. The stylus navigates these trenches through lateral, left-to-right movements for low frequencies and vertical, up and down displacement for high frequencies. This physical geometry maps directly to instrument separation, allowing the bass and the strings to exist in entirely distinct spatial planes. By maintaining this physical separation, the groove preserves the myriad timbres of the orchestra. It prevents individual instruments from bleeding together into a homogenized hum. If a record is overpacked with too much audio per side, the grooves must be cut narrow. When that happens, the dynamic swings have to be artificially limited, otherwise the extreme amplitudes will force the stylus to skip out of the trench. Original masterings like the MCA 390 pressing avoided this. They utilized sufficient groove real estate to comfortably accommodate Hamlisch's aggressive acoustic swings. On a vinyl record, instrument separation is not an acoustic illusion. It is a direct translation of three-dimensional geographic space. Zooming out from the microscopic stylus track, we have to account for the total physical mass of the spinning platter. Standard consumer pressings typically weigh around 120 grams, whereas modern audiophile-grade records are pressed at 180 grams. This animation illustrates the physics of inertia in that context. The turntable motor and the surrounding room generate continuous microscopic vibrations. The heavier rotational mass of a 180-gram record actively dampens and neutralizes that interference. Stabilizing the rotation is crucial because it prevents the degradation of delicate high-frequency data. It allows the nuanced attack and decay of Scott Joplin's solo piano notes to remain perfectly pristine. Physical mass acts as an acoustic anchor, ensuring that the fragile timbres preserved in the groove survive the violent mechanical friction of real-time playback. We see the value of this mechanical preservation when we use the digital streaming ecosystem as our comparative control. This side-by-side analyzer visualizes dynamic range compression, an algorithmic tool streaming platforms use to standardize volume. The physical consequence of this brick walling is visible on the right. The algorithm artificially boosts the quietest notes and severely limits loud orchestral hits. This digital flattening collapses the separation between solo instruments and the orchestral backing. The distinct spatial planes observed in the vinyl groove are merged together. By stripping away those dynamic extremes, the underlying melancholia and nuanced acoustic depth of the original composition are effectively erased. Digital streaming offers unparalleled convenience, but its algorithmic parameters actively destroy the precise acoustic architecture that physical analog mastering was engineered to protect. Which brings us back to the physical manufacturing reality of the vinyl record. Microscopic groove tomology provides the three-dimensional space required for frequency isolation, while macroscopic rotational mass protects those delicate frequencies from mechanical interference. The vinyl record serves as a highly calibrated mechanical acoustic environment. Decoding that physical environment is the only way to experience the acoustic depth and realism originally intended by the composer.